Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mamie Ang. I'm the library director here at the Henry Waldinger Library. We are back with our Valley Stream Book Club. We do virtual meetings, so we have the pleasure of having the authors join us whenever possible. Today's book that we were discussing is called The Art Spy, and the author is Michelle Young. Normally, it would be at the end of the month, but because she was in Paris last month, we did move it to the today. So we do have some people who will be joining us later, and some people, of course, it's not our normal time, so they may not be able to make it, but the recording will be available. So I hope that you had the opportunity to read the book, or at least read part of the book, so you'll appreciate that. Michelle Young is wrote this book about Rose Valland. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct. And it's called The Art Spy, and it is very appropriate for this year. Our summer reading program is Color Your World, and it's very art themed. So I was very pleased to choose this book for you to read. Okay, so Michelle, would you like to tell us a little about yourself and how you came about writing this book?
Yeah,
And
sure. Well, I am originally from Long Island. I was born at Stony Brook Hospital, grew up in Setauket, and I studied art history in college at Harvard. And my family, my mom particularly, was always very interested in the arts, and wherever we went to museums, and that really formed my younger childhood. And Um, I discovered the Art Spy because I discovered Rose because I've always been really interested in World War II. My grandfather survived the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, and that part of World War II is obviously a big part of our family story. And I was also very interested in World War II in the Western sphere. And so when I ended up dating and marrying a French man, I decided to really dig deep into French World War II history as well, French, Britain. And in a book called Goring's Man in Paris by Jonathan Petropoulos, he is an academic in California who personally knew one of the Nazi art dealers in the Jeu de Paume Museum, which is where Rose Valland was working. His book every few chapters, this woman named Rose appeared. And I had been reading not just general World War II, but really a subgenre of female spy nonfiction World War II. I probably spent 5 years almost only reading books of that nature. And so when I realized I hadn't heard of this female spy, I was really astounded. And for many reasons, which we can discuss later, she was really like written out of the record, lost to history. And it's only in the last few decades in France that some people have become more interested in Rose's story. And so I thought there was a really good opportunity to write a book about Rose's wartime life, kind of zooming in on the 5 years of World War II. And I had a hunch going in that her story was likely a lot more exciting than even what I could find in her kind of standard biography. And I think that's the case with a lot of women and people from minority groups in wartime. Their stories get kind of subsumed under a larger narrative, usually military history. And that hunch was correct. Her wartime life was very exciting and very dangerous. Oh, I think you're
okay,
muted.
the question I had for you, okay,
hmm
um, you have this inkling about her. Was it very difficult to do the research? Sometimes there's a lot of things get lost.
Yeah.
Um,
So I love this kind of work, this kind of research work. I think in a prior life, I was probably like an academic slash librarian slash archivist type. Like this hunt, and maybe mixed with kind of a detective, this hunt is very, very exciting for me. And in a way, I had to split my brain. And so, like, there's like kind of the research brain that's quite scientific in a way. You have to have very good records, and you have to stay organized, and you have to remember all the threads that are going on. And then there's the creative writing side. And initially, I would never work on both on the same day. It was kind of like two brains. I had to split them. And then the research, as far as the research goes, one thing we are fortunate for is that Rose worked for the French National Museums. And so her work and her documents all relating to her role, whether it was with the French museums or later with kind of the diplomatic corps in France, that stuff ended up in the archives. This is not the case for most spies in World War II or any conflict, because the goal is people are not supposed to know you are a spy, right? So there's no, often very little written trail. And to give an example, Christian Dior's sister was a member of the resistance. She was arrested, sent to a concentration camp, survived, but she never wrote a memoir, and she didn't work formally for any government institution. And so there's almost no information about her. But with Rose, we have a lot of material to work with. In some ways, too much. Like there are many archives in France with her materials. She kept everything in her life. So hundreds of thousands of documents that I had to sort through. The challenge really was about um, trying to decipher through her papers she left behind the emotional, personal aspect of this person, of Rose as a character, as a hero of World War II, because she not only was an academic in the real true sense of the word, and so she was just a very like non-emotional record keeper. And so there were times in which I had to take many, many readings of the same material. And it wasn't until like I really understood her as a person after many years that when I looked back on material, I would understand like, oh, she was actually being very emotional in writing this. And then I sorted through like all of her scribbles and her drafts of documents, drafts of her book, to try to understand like all of this emotive aspect and things. And I started to understand how she also self-edited herself when it came to presenting who she was for the public. So I did. So the research was just like kind of many layers of just attacking the information and then really trying to understand it from a personal perspective.
So you're saying that this took years of research?
Yeah, I worked on this book for 4 years, 3 years kind of full time. The first year was discovering it, writing a proposal, starting some research. The first thing I did really was show up in her hometown to get a sense as a journalist, kind of is there a story here? And what I learned there was that there is a Rose Valland Plaza, but it is the parking lot of the post office. And so from even just that, I kind of understood like, even in her hometown, this is where she's been relegated to. And that really is what motivated me to really dig into it. Oh, I think you're muted.
If anyone needs to unmute, then please unmute and you can feel free to ask questions.
It it it's amazing that you spent over 4 years doing this.
Yes.
So you were just driven to find out more.
Yeah, yeah. I think having the timeline of just World War II is interesting, because if you're doing a biography that's life to death, birth to death, I mean, you can you can kind of skip over things in which maybe we don't know so much information. But if you take these 4 years, you need to know what happened. Like, for example, it was unknown what had happened to her when the Germans entered Paris. And there was just like one quote that someone had lifted from a document that I assumed initially was a letter, in which the family kept saying there are no letters for a long time. They said her letters were very uninteresting, and they weren't even sure maybe necessarily where they were. And so that not knowing that would have impacted where I could start the book. Do we start it where I ended up starting in the summer of 1939 before World War II breaks out? Or do we start it, for example, when the Nazis enter the museum? these were questions that I had to figure out, because if we didn't know what happened to her when the Germans arrived in Paris, it's like a really big hole in the story. So I ended up finding out what happened in an unpublished chapter of her memoir that was cut, and it was stuck in an archive somewhere. And someone kind of one day let me see these documents, and I realized that it was in there, and it was very exciting. And it's an example of what I mean about her self-editing, or her editor, her publisher editing it out. It's probably one of the most exciting chapters in the book about what happens to her as she tries to escape Paris down to the Loire Valley by boat and all these different transportation methods. And so yeah, so having to finding that stuff was very, very exciting.
Yeah, I apologize for being late. I just had some trouble getting on, but here I am. And I just wanted to say, I thought your book was wonderful. It was
Oh, thanks.
intriguing. I truly enjoyed it, and I loved how you wove in the story of the Rosenbergs and Alexander especially.
Yeah.
With her story. And I think you had written somewhere, it was either in the material we were given, the Magic Blue Book, or or in something that I read online, but you said you had to do something like that because, as intriguing as her work as an art spy was, in many respects, it was very administrative and very writing down things and figuring out how to record things and how to note things, which back then it was life or death every day. But in 2025, when we're reading it, it's sort of like, yeah, so she did an early spreadsheet,
Yeah.
and but you brought in these other very personal stories and very exciting stories, not only about her escape from Paris and then her return, and then how she's almost killed twice within like 2 days, at the, as the Americans are coming into Paris and liberating
Right.
free France, and the Americans are liberating. But the Rosenberg story woven in was really great.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm so glad you enjoyed that, because as you said, and to kind of maybe encapsulate it more, is that if it was just her and her documents, and of course there's a lot of risks that she's taking during this time, but in the end result is a lot of lists and documents. And do we want to really read a whole book about yet another art collection coming through and what's in it? And and I was very concerned about making sure readers understood what the human impact of art looting was. And the Rosenbergs were just sort of this perfect encapsulation from their collection of modern art, the history of the dealer of the gallery, and then of course Alexander fighting through World War II. We see the war happening while Rose is in the museum. Yeah, I really enjoyed kind of flipping between those two, but you always wonder when you're writing it, or you're like, are people gonna like it? That we're skipping back and forth? But I think from like a kind of moral and conceptual standpoint, I was like, I need to have this family in this story.
Especially since she didn't really have a family except for her essentially her spouse, her lover.
Right,
That
right.
was her family, and she didn't seem to have any sort of family. Had she a family, that might have she was involved with, that might have been different. The other thing I really liked was how you scaffolded how the Germans, and they did this in other areas as well, but how they kept on building different ways to escape with art and valuable, basically how to steal.
Yeah,
And how at first it looks almost, there's almost a legality about it, and then by the end,
yeah.
it's just bring in the cattle cars and let's load up some art, and
Yeah, totally. And I was, reading decrees after decrees of German orders. And
yes.
yes, it was so elaborate. And then, that was kind of one of the big works I had to do, was like, how do you distill all of that so that it's not boring? Like, it's important it's essential to include this information, but there were so many decrees, right? And so I think part of like my art history background and journalism background helped here, because I could think, okay, these are the essential things that relate to the story, and we need to keep this, but we don't need necessarily some of that other material, because they were just like, writing letters and constantly writing about how to get around the system and how to make it legal. It was nonstop.
One of the other things I thought worked really well was the short chapters and the bold chapter titles.
Yeah, that was
Oh,
good.
great.
Especially
Yeah.
since there were so many names and there were so many things going on at once. You're shocked back into awareness when you see Paris, 1940,
Yeah.
April
Yeah.
17th,
Oh,
1943.
great.
You're shocked back into awareness. But I have two questions.
Yeah,
One
please.
is there's no index. And I would have loved an index. Loved an
No,
index.
so I'm pushing to have that for the paperback. I honestly, I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure what happened. Like, it got down to the end of the editing and I said, so where's the index? And they said, no index. But I'm hoping, because the paperback is actually the version that kind of lives on in the world, because it's
Well,
the
it's
one
the one I
that
usually
gets
buy. So,
reprinted and reprinted.
yeah.
And so I'm asking to see if I can get the index in that version.
The other thing I was wondering about is there's no timeline.
Hmm.
Everything is very sequential and boom, 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 boom.
Yeah,
And there's like these parallel stories that are happening, but there's no visual timeline. And
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So if you want to put in an extra 2 months of work for your paperback, I think that would be effort.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. Yeah, there's all these choices. Like, some books also have short character descriptions, at the beginning, so who you're gonna
Yeah, and you can, when you forget after the 55th name, you can go back.
Yeah. So I've seen that, and I think that works too. But the chapter thing, that was like something that just happened rather organically. Right before I turned it in, I said, "Wait, to my editor, should I put chapter names in here?"
Mhm.
And she said, "No, I like it like this." So, and I've had other people tell me that they like that format because
Yeah,
it kind of keeps you going. But yeah.
yes, it does. Yeah.
During this whole process, okay, 4
Yeah.
years, had you sold the book or the premise of the book before you got involved in it? Or did you have to
So yeah, about a year in is when I kind of finished all of the finding an agent, writing a proposal, thinking about it. I was also very pregnant and ill with my second daughter during this year. So it was sort of something like I tabled for a while. So probably had I not been pregnant, I would have worked a little faster that year. But then once you sell the book, have a deal agreement, you have to pretty much start working on it immediately. And actually, like, it often takes like months to get a book contract, which is something I didn't really quite understand. I was like, why should I work on this book if there's no contract? But I was told, no, the timeline starts now. And yeah, but nonfiction is sold this way in advance versus novels, which are sold usually completed unless you are an extremely famous novelist. Like, I think Stephen King can sell many books at once prior to them being done, for example.
One of the other things that was fascinating was that, as you pointed out, no one has heard of her, with the exception of the immediate post-war years where she was recognized and awarded,
Yeah.
rewarded, for her bravery and her work. No one recognized her. So I finished reading a book this spring, called Left Bank, and it has a subtitle. I can't remember. You know that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a great book, also very exciting. A little bit more gossipy than your book was, but it was very exciting, and there was a great deal about the resistance and
Yeah.
parts of Paris that I'm sure she was
Yeah.
much involved in.
Moving
She
around.
is not in that at all. I went back
No.
to my copy. I looked her up. I looked through. I looked for the museum.
It's
Nothing.
super interesting, because I think when I started the project, I just assumed, well, female, maybe because she's lesbian. I thought of it as these kind of categories that would have made her forgotten. But then as the research continued, and really by the very end, I realized that, you know, from her own letters and what some other people were saying, that she was very deliberately silenced by the French government. And so I think
Yes.
that's the major reason. And also, she just really doesn't fit into the French societal Catholic dominant mode of how society still works today. Some of the names I mention in here in the book, people who may have collaborated or, you know, said a lot of anti-Semitic things, they are still in power in France today. Like, actually, I was at a hotel for a few days in France, and there was a meeting going on, and there was Sarkozy at this meeting, and next to him was the CEO of the Accor Hotels, who's a Bazin. So I don't know his exact lineage from Germain Bazin in this book. But, you know, it just, what I'm trying to say is that the powers that were in power before the war, many of them, those families remained in power after the war. And there, she was saying a lot of inconvenient truths. And and then the most damning thing was a letter that a fellow researcher found. I've been working with her because she's focused on Rose's post-war life. She's a French documentary maker. And she had found a stack of letters totally somewhere else. And this is where she wrote that she had been told not to write her second memoir by the former ambassador to Germany. You know, so these were extremely famous, powered people who were telling her not to. And amongst the other things, like her book being pulled off the shelves and other examples that show that there was, yeah, she was being silenced. And so, you know, I meet tons of French people that have never heard of her. And, you know, my book will come out in France in 2 years, but it took a lot of time to sell it because what we kept getting back was, well, there was a book 3 years ago, so, you know, it's been done. And the woman working on the documentary, she's getting that same thing. We've had documentaries about her. No need for another one. So, you know, it's interesting how it continues to perpetuate because she just doesn't fit into the idea of the resistance that the French have. And the other thing is that they believe that resistance members, they have to kind of be in the field. There's like this kind of cloak and dagger concept of a resistance person. And so what I tried in the book to show is that she was actually doing this. Just because she was in a museum doesn't mean there's no cloak and dagger, right? And even my own in-laws, you know, when I first told them I'm writing this book, well, was she really part of the resistance, was like the first question. So
When you say it's going to be published in France, will it be translated into French?
yeah, so that's what I mean. Yeah, so the English version is available. There's like an international paperback version, and the hardcover can also be, you can also find it in Europe, but it'll be translated by a French publisher, which is exciting. Yeah, it's interesting to work on it. You know, I'm curious what edits they'll make and how they'll this format, narrative nonfiction, is not really a genre in France. It's kind of more general. They do like kind of straightforward biographies. So we'll see.
Do you speak French?
I do. It improves over the years. So in a way, I've been trying to learn it for 15 years. And working on this book helped because it was funny because there was one visit. I was going to go to Chambord Castle in Valençay, and they were giving me tours there. And I was a little nervous at that time to go and do these interviews without my husband, who couldn't make that trip. And so I was looking online for translators who could maybe come with me. And I think once they saw American and working on a book, their rates did not match what was on their website anymore. And it was like so expensive. And I was like, you know what? I think I can do it. And so my French improved a lot, but I'm still working on it. It's a long road. I never studied a Romance language. It's like I know Mandarin, Taiwanese, I studied German. Totally useless for my adult life, apparently.
I was just curious if you were going to read your book in French just to see what they do to it, because you did allude to them
Yeah, so
maybe not necessarily telling the same story as you've written, as you've written
yeah,
it.
and it's kind of why I also picked my editor and publisher carefully there. I wanted someone that kind of I don't know, I felt like a kinship for in terms of what she
Mhm.
wanted to do and how she saw the book. And I found her to be very like American in spirit. And so I was like, I think this is going to be a good fit. And even when I sat with the woman who's going to translate it and the publisher, it felt like everyone understood what we wanted to do with the book. So fingers crossed. But then my husband will read it. He was actually a reader of all my English writing and helped me make sure all the translations were correct. So he also came with me to the archives.
Will you be working with the translator?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, one of the interesting things is like because I translated from from French into English, luckily I have a spreadsheet of like the original French because you don't want to translate back into the French, right? And then get it wrong. Because sometimes you have to decide, do you make a literal translation, but you might actually miss the meaning of it if you literally do it, right? And so there was not that many cases, but there were a few where my husband and I made a decision. We have to do a non-literal translation to get the feel of what she's saying here, not, yeah. But then you don't want to retranslate it back. And there's Spanish and German too that's quoted. And so we have all that kind of documented. So that was kind of one of the questions we talked about with the translator is let's make sure we have the original sources and then also cutting out stuff that's too obvious for French people, you know.
Yeah. So this was such a big project. One of the things I was wondering about at the end was, although I was going to save this question for the end. I'm sure somebody else asked it, which is, what are you going to do next? And then my husband said, this book was just published. It's good for
No, it's okay.
years to do this. Doesn't she get a break? And also she has 2 children.
No, but I'm actually not someone that really likes to be dormant. So, no, I am in the process of finishing my next book proposal. So originally I was going to go back to World War II because there were a lot of stories that I either did not include or only like lightly touched on that I found really fascinating. But then I kind of realized I wasn't sure I wanted to be in the same headspace 2 times in a row. And so another story has come up, which I can't talk about yet, but it's basically more modern day true crime investigative thing that I'm actually personally connected to. So I'm working on that, which is not World War II at all. And then I think I'll then be very excited to return. But I think the fear, I know a lot of writers like kind of stay in the same genre. For me, the fear would be kind of revisiting a well too soon and like feeling like I'm not as inspired or something is like being repeated. And I'm still going to the archives because there's a few things I want to, if I can find, I would like to include in the French book. But even then, like getting those boxes and looking at it, I was like, oh, I feel like I've been here and I don't want to sift through this. Whereas normally I'm so excited to sift through a box of letters, you know? So it's sort of wanting to make sure that kind of everything I'm working on is like something I'm like very, very passionate about that I want to do.
Yeah, well, one of the great things about your book was the enthusiasm comes through.
Oh,
It
great.
just comes through from the beginning to the end, which is, it's like working with an enthusiastic teacher. If the teacher is
Yeah.
enthusiastic, students pick up some, the energy as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
So it's good you found a way to avoid going stale.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of writers were my friends were concerned. Like, are you sure it's the right decision?
Well, some people like I don't know if there was someone that could be like a counterpart, and would you ever try to do it from another point of view? The same,
Oh, yeah.
like fiction, they do sometimes. They'll take one character and then the next one will be from another point of view. But I guess that's not
Sure.
going to happen in real life.
No, but maybe a lot of you have read books by Lynn Olson. She writes a lot of World War II. She was very, very helpful with my book. I was just such a fan of her work, and I emailed her, and she emailed me right back right when I started this. And she's actually working on a book about the resistance inside the Louvre. So I think that is a very good counterpoint to this story. And hoping to find more about Jacques Jaujard, who also didn't write his own memoir. He died young of a heart attack not too long after World War II. So any more we can find out about him, I think is really exciting. So I read, you know, she's like, in a way, she kind of passed the torch to me on this part of the story. Now I return it back to her. And I'm excited because all her books are wonderful.
You had mentioned that you had written other books, but this is your first, like, really more popular type writing?
Yeah, and with like a traditional Big Five publisher. The others are what we would consider indie publishers. So it's just a complete different process. But yeah, I don't know if you have specific questions about either the prior books or the process. Happy to answer those.
So was your editor more involved because they want you to make money for them, obviously?
Well, the process is definitely more involved, right? There's countless numbers of edits that happened actually in a very short period of time. And even there's something called the galley, which is like the book, that version that goes out. It used to be for bookstores, but now it's sort of like an influencer slash, but also to libraries and other things. And we had 7 rounds of editing after that galley. So yeah, I hate when I see the galley on sale, like on eBay. Like I bought one of them because I was like, I don't want people reading that version. So in that sense, yes, much more involved. There's like much more teams, you know, there's like marketing, there's publicity. I didn't even know there was a difference between those two before going in. And what else? But I think in terms of when I was writing the book, my editor gave me a choice. She said, either you can send me stuff and get feedback all along the way if you like, or you can just send it to me at the end. And I'm someone that does not like feedback. Or at least until I think a product is ready for it to get feedback. And so I didn't show her anything. I did have like calls with her on occasion to talk about, like, I'm thinking to go do this, or I'm thinking about this. But I didn't show her any writing. And then when I turned it in, that's kind of what I felt like, okay, now I want for someone to tell me what they think, because I've read it through so many times now, and I feel like it's not the final product, but it's something that I feel good about.
I wanted also to share that I really thought your physical descriptions of people, especially since they're all dead and gone, 99% of them are not here.
Yeah.
And all you had were photographs, if that. The physical descriptions of people were very good because they allowed me as a reader, and I think probably this is true for some other people too, to latch on to build a picture in my head of what this person looked like. I have a distinct picture in my head of what the senior Rosenberg looks like, and I'm sure it's wrong, but I have a picture in my head.
Yeah.
In fact, I didn't want to look at the picture that was in the book because I thought, no.
Sometimes it's disappointing, right?
Yeah,
Or
that's right. It's
disconnect.
nothing like you imagined. And so, and that added really to the storytelling quality of it. And that was,
Oh, great. Yeah. Yeah. In many cases, I scoured, you know, for photos. And one of the last batches of material that Rose's family gave me contained all of Joyce's passports, Rose's partners.
oh, yeah.
And ID cards and everything. And that was amazing because she'd always been described as blonde because she was that. But I realized that when she first arrived to Paris, she was actually a brunette. She's not a natural blonde. And you know, and she was stunning with whatever hair color, and then to see her young photos, it was like, whoa, like this is like a movie star looking woman. Like the photos that we usually see of her partner, if any, there's so few that are available publicly, are kind of her middle age. It's post-war. She's middle-aged at that point. She still looks beautiful, but I saw what she looked like at like 19, 20 years old, and I was like, wow, like it just tells you so much about their relationship in some ways, right? And
It is very interesting because the one the couple of photographs you have, she is a knockout. I mean, she's clearly a knockout. Whereas Rose, she was a fine-looking woman, but she was not a knockout.
and
I
she
mean,
didn't seem to care about her appearance too much.
no,
Yeah.
no, I identify with Rose.
Yeah.
And I was looking at this and thinking, she must have been thoroughly enraptured by Rose's passion for her work,
I
her
think so.
intelligence, her diligence,
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
nothing of her passion for France. So, and
Right, right. And yeah, one of the really fun finds was seeing all of Joyce's employment documents, which included her job
yeah.
reviews, and I quoted that, right? And then Robert Murphy, who's a very famous diplomat, saying that basically she was just like she should just stay as a secretary, that her intellect, would never rise above that. And then, later then to find her PhD thesis and all these things and
Mhm,
what her advisor wrote about her.
mhm.
And yeah, like to me, like these discoveries are so exciting when you can start to piece together, how narratives sometimes get twisted, not sometimes, not always on purpose, but just like it's based on what you can find, right? And I don't think anyone knew that really that Joyce was so intellectually really on the same par as Rose, I think.
It's not easy to get a doctorate from where she got her doctorate. So
Yeah.
she did the work, and she
Yeah.
had the smarts. I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you, speaking of finding out things, how did you come upon the earlier draft of Rose's
Yeah.
book?
This was actually a roundabout thing. So I worked very closely with the Rose Vallon Association in France, in her
Yeah.
hometown. It's run by this amazing firecracker of a woman named Jacqueline Bartolet, who is by trade a ski instructor, rugby instructor, and accidentally got roped in really by people in her town to say, why aren't you helping us celebrate this hometown hero? And so for the last like few decades, she's been embroiled in all of this. And so we met and we instantly got along, and she opened all these doors. And she mentioned at some point, there's this man who wrote like a several hundred page unpublished biography of Rose. But the French are very like cagey in certain ways. It's like, they'll drip you information, but then like not follow up or like, and then after many dinners and lunches, then they start giving you more information. So that's really what happened here. So what we did, my husband and I, wherever we went, archives, would be like, hey, have you heard about this book? And at
Mhm.
one of them, the guy said, he was almost stunned. He said, oh, but it's here. I have it. And so, because this man who wrote it had passed away, he was obsessed with Rose. And it was probably 500 or more pages long. And he was the kind of writer academic that really didn't know how to edit. So what he did was he would dump whole things into his book, right? So he ended up putting the entire unpublished chapter in his
Oh,
book. So that
wow.
was where I first came across it, right? But
Mhm.
then I found he had sourced it to a box in the National Archives. It's part of like the Rose. They all have career dossiers. If you worked for the museums, you get this kind of documentation in these boxes there. But every time I tried to request it, they said you can't look at it because it has private information that you can't see until the year 2040 or 2050 or something crazy. Um, and then so another archivist researcher then told me, no, 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 but I've seen it. I'll show it to you on my computer. She's like, you got to ask them again. And
Mhm.
so I said, I don't need any personal private information. I just need these chapters. And so I got those versions, which is the same as he put in that writer had included. But then I found more drafts of it in other archives. And that was the thing about Rose. She left her papers everywhere in different places. So like that original researcher that I was talking about who passed away, he would say, "Oh, she wrote 2 pages of this letter, but the last three are missing, probably gone." And I would find it in another archive. and it'd be labeled 3, 4, 5 with the dates, you know, so you knew that they were. And so it was always like this. And so her drafts of this one chapter, which there were many, were in many places. And so I used them all really to tell that chapter, because sometimes she'd cut things and then other things would reappear. And so that was really fun, more detective work. And some of it was handwritten, some of it was typewritten. And so it's always like the more I can get my hands on, the more interesting details can end up in the book.
As time goes on, like, do you feel that there's going to be other people who are lost in history if someone doesn't start pursuing them? I mean,
yeah, all the time. I mean, you know, there was one of the women, a few of the women that I follow through this book, there was one named Agnes Humbert. She's the one who ends up in the concentration camp. I don't think anyone's heard of her, you know, and she wrote her own memoir. So there's always people, and to tell Joyce's incarceration, that part of the story, I read so many memoirs of British women who were also incarcerated, some who were quite famous, and I'm telling you, almost nobody has heard of the incarceration of British women in France during World War II. That was just a really unknown story. So it's constantly happening. But I think anytime you do work like this, you're just like, you're going down these threads and finding new things. And where I could, when it didn't get too distracting, I would try to include some of these other tidbits. But you know what we're lucky about with World War II is that we have documents. I'm concerned about the current time period, right? I have the documents between Rose and her boss when they're like talking about how do we pack the art, and all of that information is like on a physical piece of paper that got saved. But like, how are we going to write about this time period? How are the, you know, the writers and researchers of the future? Like, are people going to give access to their Gmail accounts? Probably not, you know. How is that archival work going to happen? I don't have an answer to that, but
That's very interesting. I went to the Lincoln Center Music Library on Saturday. My husband actually took me there because he loves music, et cetera, and he hadn't been to the Lincoln Center Library in decades since they renovated it. And
yeah,
I walked in, I realized you can no longer get into the stacks. There's a lot of books on the second floor that you can get into, but you cannot get into the stacks. And when I was in graduate school, because I dragged out my graduate degree for so long, that's one of the things that happened across the time I was in graduate school.
yeah,
I used to be able to go into the stacks and stay there. You could fall
Yeah.
asleep there and they'd have to
right.
wake up when
You have
they're,
like desks. I know, like when I
yes,
was,
the little corrals, you know, and I had my own corral, you know, et cetera. And by the end, you had to submit requests. And I thought, well, what happened to walking along and seeing something interesting on the shelf, pulling it out and discovering something you never would have seen? You know,
yeah,
it's sort of like going down the rabbit hole online, except somehow it feels more open
yeah,
and like there's more available to reach out and grab. So
yeah.
I can
One of the
understand why you're
things,
concerned about that.
yeah, and one of the things actually experienced with this was there was a box I got at the diplomatic archives in France. So this is everything that Rose left behind in her office. It's a lot of the restitution work she did after the war, but then there was several hundred boxes that just labeled Rose's personal documents and nothing inventory, right? So I went with a friend's mother who got really into this book project, and I hired her to help me go through all of this material because we had to open every box and go through every sheet of paper in these boxes. And there was one box in which I found a notebook, or we found a notebook of shorthand. And if that was shorthand written in the war, that would have been very, very interesting to me, right? But when I went back a month later or less than a month later, they said, oh, the box has been digitized. You can no longer get the physical box anymore. You can look at the material digitized on our computer.
Not the
However,
same.
you can no longer download from the computer due to the war in Ukraine. You cannot stick a USB thing into the computer anymore because of security reasons. And so they were like, you can only take pictures with your phone of the screen. And I was like, this is like a handwritten in pencil thing. And I had found this I had figured out what shorthand it was. And through Reddit, found a group of people in France, in the middle of France, who were so excited that they wanted to translate it for me. But I couldn't get the actual document. So, and then it took like 3 months for them to finally actually explain to me I can just order and pay for the digitized documents. I kept asking for the box. It's so French. Basically, they're trying to tell me you were asking the wrong question. But anyway, you know, I think there's something about opening that material and touching it that's really important research-wise. It's very different to look at it in a big PDF. So I was a little sad about that it's like so difficult, impossible to get it once it's digitized.
Well, you better hurry up because everything's being either digitized or ditched.
Yeah, because I think the idea is like conceptually you digitize because maybe more people can then access that material. But sometimes what happens is that it becomes harder to access that material, right? It had the reverse effect.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. You know, that's another book that I will volunteer you to write, which is Rose's post-war work in reclamation and in bringing back art to
Yeah,
France. That was a short, you
I
know,
know.
very short, and I thought, well, I guess the book was it was time to move on. But I was so interested in the work that she did because it sounded like she had to be equally clever, equally persuasive,
Yeah.
equally no, you want to let me in here, and here's why.
Yeah.
And it just sounded very, very interesting. And then she reclaimed a lot,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
given
It
it
is.
was.
It is really interesting. From a narrative perspective, it's like she was there 8 years. So I think like, you know, I was so in depth, in detail in the 5 years, and then it felt strange to kind of just start leaping at the end. But my original idea was that I would include maybe the first year of her restitution work. But books, like I find that you realize when they're done. And I wrote this book chronologically. And when Liberation Day ended, I was like, this feels like the end of the book. And then we have like an epilogue that kind of closes things out. But then, yeah, it felt like I was diving into something new. Yeah, so part 2 or someone else. I
Or
think I'm
someone else,
passing the
yeah.
torch.
It's another book, yeah.
That was very interesting about the shorthand. My sister works for the police department, and they had some notes, and it was in shorthand, and they had to put out a call. Does anyone know how to read the shorthand anymore? Because they were old notes from some case before they had the court recorders or something, and it was done in shorthand.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot even the path that led me. Like I was asking people and people were giving me suggestions, and finally someone was like, check out this group on Reddit. They'll help you identify it. And then that group ended up helping me find the people who still know it. And it's like there's like I think 3 types of shorthand, and this one is like not used at all anymore.
The younger people can't even read cursive writing anymore.
Oh, I know. I've like made my kids go analog, and I'm gonna teach them cursive.
Not a bad thing.
No, I don't think so.
Well, I really appreciate you talking to us.
Yeah,
It's a fascinating book. I think that
thank
we
you.
all kind of enjoyed it, and we'll be looking for. So you have a timeline of when you think the next one's going to be out, or we'll just have to look, keep an eye on
I
it.
mean, based on the last timeline, it's probably like 4 years, but I'm following kind of an active case, so I think it'll also depend on what happens with that. But Usually they give you around 1.5 to 2 years to write the book, any book of nonfiction. They usually want it faster. They asked me for 1 year, and I said, I'm reading documents in French, German, and like it's not going to happen in 1 year. So yeah, then there's like kind of like a year of the editing and the production, and after that.
But you said that you had written books, you published independently prior
Yeah.
to this book. So, did you use a pseudonym, or are they?
No, they're under my name. Yeah, so the first book was one of those Arcadia history books. Arcadia had asked me to write a book about the history of Broadway, the street, not the Broadway shows. So I did that, and then a publisher in France who does English guides and French guides reached out. And so I wrote several guidebooks called Secret Brooklyn. I helped update another one called Secret New York that was written by someone else. And so those are the kind of things I did before.
Did you do Secret Paris?
No, someone else wrote that. Yeah. I might now need to do Secret Berkshires because that's where I moved to.
Oh, okay. Have you ever thought of writing fiction, given all the wonderful stories you are exposed to in doing your research?
So I think I've got one fiction book in me, and it is going to be maybe the very last thing I'll ever write, but it's I want to do something that is based on my family's history in Taiwan, but not one family kind of has it all for a fiction book. So it works, I think, if I kind of combine them into one family. And every time I go back, I get kind of reinterested in that book and those stories, but it's sort of something I'm biding my time with. I'm not super comfortable writing fiction, so I think it's going to take me a long time.
Yeah.
Does anyone else any other questions,
Yeah,
or
please.
before we kind of end for the evening? It's almost been an hour, so it's been fascinating to hear about this.
Oh, thanks.
And we do appreciate it, the time that you put in. I would say I don't know how I'll ever think about reading the French version since I don't read French.
It's okay. But I will say that I will be on Long Island a couple times this fall. So I should be doing a book signing at the Stony Brook Barnes and Noble. I have to confirm that date. And then going to my hometown library, MS Clark Library, and I'm speaking there in November. And hopefully more Long Island stuff.
What is your hometown library?
MS Clark Library in Setauket.
Oh, Setauket. Okay.
Yeah, that is where I was born and grew up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.